Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of Q&A Social Security Disability Today. I am your host, Attorney Anthony Reeves, so let's get to your questions. The first question that we received here today has to focus on an individual who's going through the disability process. They've been out of work since 2008, and their question really is, what can I do in the meantime when I can hardly do anything? Here's one of the toughest things that I have to explain to people is that during the disability process, the simple fact of the matter is, life still goes on. You still got bills to pay. You still have things to do. Unfortunately, the world doesn't really recognize that you're disabled until you actually get a disability decision. But the toughest part is the actual waiting. Social Security has been really working hard to reduce the amount of time that it takes to actually get a favorable disability decision. But the reality is that it still is a process that you got to go through. The tough thing is that I always tell people that if you're going to try to work, recognize that Social Security is going to be interested in the fact that you've attempted to go back to work. But you also have to know your own body as well. The simple fact of the matter is that a lot of people in their minds and their heart, they know they want to try to do something, but they're just not sure if their bodies will let them do it. If you attempt to try to do something, just be straightforward with Social Security and let them know when you've tried it and then when you stop trying it. I can tell you that this process is tough, it's hard, and it's long. And unfortunately, the reality is that even though you're going through the process, life doesn't stop. Do what you can, but just make sure you keep Social Security involved so this way they will know what's going on in your case, and more importantly, if you have a representative, they know what's going on with your case. So this way, they can be able to explain to Social Security if you've tried to do something and you weren't successful in doing it. Our second question comes from a person from an offline chat room asking the question, what happens if I'm paying in Social Security and my employer pays in? How do they calculate what I get? This is the one thing that I tell people all the time. When you're paying into Social Security system, don't try to calculate your money, because people do this all the time. They're going through the disability process, they're getting close to the point, they finally get approved, and then all of a sudden they start trying to do the math. And I tell people all the time, there's a couple of things you need to keep in mind. First and foremost, the amount of disability that it's been determined for you to receive based on your date of disability is going to probably be different from what you get now. Let's kind of look at it like this. Let's say that they determined that you were disabled back in 2009. You filed an application in 2010. So in 2009 is the date that they start your benefits coming back to 2012. Well, each year goes up, should be, for cost of living. Remember, there was a period of time when cost of living allowance actually froze. Now, for those of you who are like, well, what do you mean by cost of living? Typically, your benefits should go up, and this is for disability insurance benefits, not SSI, every 3% every year that you're getting benefits. So a dollar amount for 1 year is going to be different from a dollar amount for another year. Second thing I tell people is don't sit here and try to figure out the math, because Social Security has a variety of different calculations that they use based on if there's gaps in employment, what you paid into the system, how old you are. As opposed to trying to figure it out, just ask them to tell you. It's just really that simple. Just say, I want to know what my primary insurance amount is if I am found disabled. Just that simple. Primary insurance amount. If you have kids under the age of 18 living with you, ask them if my children will also be included. I'm a firm believer of the people not trying to reinvent the wheel and try to do something that they're not as versed on doing. So for the person who asked the question about, okay, how are they going to calculate it? They paid this, I paid this, and they paid this. What am I going to get? I'm a firm believer. It's going to take me more time to explain to you how to calculate it when you can just get on the phone Monday morning or the first thing next day and call Social Security, and they can tell you that information right off the gate. question has to focus on a back pay question relating to a child. This individual said their child is entitled to receive $14,000 in back pay. Now they're upset because Social Security is informing them that they're only going to get $2,000 every 6 months until the back pay is paid off. They're a little concerned that this is Social Security's attempt at retaliating against them. If you are receiving supplemental security income, or SSI, which is typically the case for children, and you can get it from adults as well, most people don't know that the way they pay you is exactly the circumstances that was described here. You don't get your lump sum all up front. What happens is that you get it broken down into 6-month increments. So if you've got $14,000, they're going to give you an increment now. 6 months later, they're going to give you another increment. And then another 6 months later, they're going to give you another increment. I believe it's like 2 or 3 increments so that they pay it all off. So please do not think that they are retaliating against you if they're breaking the payments up, because that's typically the way they do it. Now, if you're expressing a concern because you're in dire financial straits, I mean you're about to lose your home, you're about to lose your car, something significant is about to happen. In some instances, if you can provide documentation to show this, Social Security will release the entire back pay. But they're not going to just take your word. So you just can't roll in there and say, oh, we in a tough financial spot, can you hook us up? No, they're going to want some documentation to demonstrate that your condition financially is so destitute, that you're in such a bad spot that you need this money now. Our fourth question is really a piggyback off of the last one, where they're saying that now Social Security is asking for copies of receipts before they release any monies. Of course, your first thought is, what's up with that? Let me tell you what that means. Typically what happens is when Social Security is asking for receipts for specific items that you've purchased, that's usually a good indication that the account has been categorized as a dedicated account. What does that mean by dedicated account? Sometimes what happens is Social Security has a concern that the monies that are received on behalf of the individuals are being used for very specific purposes. Let me give you a good example. For instance, let's say you have a child that you're raising and that the child has a lot of allergies, and so you have carpet in your home. And so the doctor says, listen, you need to get rid of that carpet and have hardwood because the carpet in the home is causing the allergic problems that your child is having. And they're on disability because they have breathing problems and asthma, things of that nature. So guess what? You take that lump sum and you have the carpet removed. So guess what Social Security is going to do? They're going to contact you and say, why would you shoot this amount of money to have the carpet removed? Because you know what that looks like? That looks like a personal expense for the benefit of the person who's doing it, not necessarily the child. So what do you do to take care of that? You provide in a doctor's note indicating that the reason the carpet was because the doctor recommended it based on the child's conditions. Then you provide copies of the receipts from where you paid for it. Social Security is not trying to be a jerk about this. They just want to make sure that the money is being used specifically for the purpose that it was designed to. So if you take if all of a sudden you decide to shoot $4,000 for this flat screen TV, they're going to ask the question, what were you using that money for? Why did they need a TV like that? Well, then that's where people get into trouble. And I tell people all the time, because if Social Security has a concern that you're not using the money in accordance with what they're saying that you can, and they're not going to sit there and let you try to figure it out. They're going to tell you. They're going to give you a breakdown of what you could spend the money on. If you go outside of that breakdown and you can't explain it, it's a very good chance that they may look to have someone else handle the money on that person's behalf. So if it looks like Social Security is on you for receipts, ask Social Security, is this a dedicated account? And if it is, they should have provided you a detailed listing of all of the items that they need for you to account for. So this way, you won't have any doubt. Our fifth payment is what I call an overpayment question, and this comes up a lot. Here's the scenario. An individual gets on disability benefits because they were having major kidney problems. 2 years into receiving disability benefits, the person gets a kidney transplant. And guess what? After several months, the kidneys is functioning fine. They're rocking and rolling. So what happens is they contact Social Security and tell them we no longer need it because we're good to go. Person goes back to work. So guess what happens? Social Security still keeps paying the person. You go up and you call them again. Hey, I'm working part-time now or full-time. I don't need the money from Social Security. The checks keep coming. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, you get this rump shaker letter telling you you owe $15,000, $16,000, $20,000, and ooh, you are hot. Because in your mind, you've told Social Security a couple of different times that you shouldn't have been receiving these checks. Why are you still getting paid for them? And you're upset. So what do you do? I'm going to go backwards here, and I want you to follow me along with this. First and foremost, Social Security does allow for overpayments if they've paid you more money than you've received. You do have a remedy available to you. You can ask them to waive it. And the two typical types of waiver are what we call a hardship waiver, or basically the other type of waiver where you're not at fault, where you're basically saying it's not my fault that they didn't fix the problem. Hardship waiver is a little bit easier because you're basically saying that it would be a financial destitution. It would be traumatizing if you were to slap this overpayment on it because it would destroy our ability to function. And then, of course, you just have to provide documentation of it. Now, when you're trying to argue that it's not my fault, let me tell you where it becomes troubling. First and foremost, I can't tell you the number of times people call and say, well, I called Social Security, and I'll ask a few questions. Do you remember who you spoke to? Well, no. Did you remember when you spoke to them? No. Did you send a follow-up letter to them telling them that they needed to terminate the disability because you no longer need it? Well, no. Let me ask you a bigger question. When you were getting these payments and you knew you weren't supposed to get them, did you put it into a separate bank account in the event Social Security came back later? Well, no, but I thought maybe they thought I was supposed to get it. Now, hear this line of thought you're just telling me. You repeatedly told Social Security that you should not be getting them. They're paying you, yet you're still cashing the checks. You're still using the money, and now you want to holler that, oh, well, I told them to stop, but you kept spending the money. It's kind of one of those things where ask yourself the question. On the one breath, you benefited from the fact that they kept doing it. Now, this is what people say, well, I figured this is Social Security. They knew better. Yeah, but you knew you weren't supposed to be getting this. So you chose to continue to enjoy the benefit of getting it. And now you want to raise hell because now they've brought it to your attention that they shouldn't have been giving it to you in the first place. I'm not beating you up. I don't want anybody to think you're wrong because we're all human. I understand. Trust me, I do. But this is what you've got to keep it in a vacuum. When you're in a position where you're now trying to say that you are not at fault, you now have to look at this critically. What have you done to demonstrate to Social Security that you are not at fault? Did you put it in writing? Do you remember who you talked to? How many times? Think about it. Did you call back every month to tell them, please stop, please stop? Or was it maybe one or two times and over a course of a couple of years, they kept paying you? You got to take some additional responsibility to this because this is how Social Security is looking at this. Now, in hindsight, as you're going forward, you can make those repeated arguments because what they're supposed to do is they're supposed to annotate to their system when you call. So you want to bring it to their attention. I did call, I don't remember then when, but it should be in your system. Social Security is a federal entity. They are not in the business of giving money away. So be ready. If you find yourself in an overpayment, I strongly encourage you to talk to an attorney who handles overpayments, or just sit down and work with Social Security to see if there's a way you can work this out. Because the last thing you want to do is be in a situation where only thing you have to rely on is your word that you called them and told them that you didn't need the benefits anymore. Our sixth question has to deal with the way Social Security treats you. Someone asked the question, how can they get away with treating you so inhumane? This is the thing that most people struggle with when going through the Social Security process. It is a case-by-case basis. And the hard thing is, there are great cases that take a long time to get paid, and then there are cases that are not so much great, but they get paid a lot earlier. The simple fact of the matter is that really it is to your benefit for them to be thorough. Because let's be honest, there are people within the system who are trying to take advantage of the system. There are people who are not clearly are not able to shouldn't be receiving disability at all, and they're going to bog down the system trying to get it to the best of their ability. Keep this thought in mind. It stinks, but there are million of Americans who are in the exact same situation. It doesn't make it right, but let me also stress, Social Security recognizes that this process takes a while. They really do. And I've been doing this for a decade, and from talking to them on a regular basis, they recognize that people are frustrated, that it takes time. Don't let yourself feel that they are singling you out or treating you like a dog because the process takes a while. It really is to your benefit, because let's be honest here. Would you rather them find you disabled and then somebody else come back later and say, no, you're not? Or would you rather them get enough evidence to demonstrate that you're disabled? And here's the other thing that you got to keep in mind. Social Security is 9 times out of 10, it's not really them that's the hang-up. They get beat up because they're the ones that are responsible for processing the system. But let's be real. If they need information from you and you take a while to get it to them, that's going to be a problem. If they need information from a third party and that person takes a while getting that information to them, that's going to be a problem. Let's say they need medical records from your doctor, and your doctor wants to charge an arm and a leg before they release them. Social Security is not going to pay an arm and a leg to get your records. That's not Social Security's fault. That's your doctor's problem. Again, all of these things play into the process. So keep in mind when you're going through the system, and I don't want anyone to think that this is a system that is really fair. Meaning, I don't want you to think that, okay, it's fair to have to wait months and months, because it's not fair to have to wait that long. But I want you to also be mindful of the fact that there are also external factors involved here that involve you, third parties, people that you told them to contact, and your doctors. And these things drag the process out. So when you're going to apply, make sure you get everybody on point. You let your doctors know that Social Security is going to be contacting them. You let your friends know that they need to get these forms and get them back to them as quick as possible. Because those are the things that really cause a drag on the process. A lot more than you realize. Our 7th and final question is, what is a single decision maker? Okay. Social Security has a number of different ways by which individuals can be found disabled or not be found disabled. One of the processes that they use is what we call a single decision maker process. That means somebody, in some instances, it's usually a state agency worker, will make an independent determination based on the information they have in front of them, whether or not the individual is disabled. In most instances, they are going to communicate with a mental or a physical provider to kind of corroborate to ensure that their interpretations of the evidence supports the decision that they're making. Now, remember, a single decision maker, if it's a state worker, we're not talking about somebody who is a medical provider. We're talking about someone who's looking at the evidence, who's probably communicating with a doctor, because according to the regulations, they're required to do so, to give them guidance about whether or not they have enough information in that particular instance to make their decision. In most instances, the doctors don't sign off on the decision, the worker does. And they're doing it because if they believe they have enough to make a decision right there without having to hold up the process, that's what they'll do. So that's what a single decision-making process actually is.